It was supposed to be a weekend getaway, me and a few friends, lost in the wilderness of the Pacific Northwest. We set up our camp in a clearing, and as the night drew in, the forest around us felt alive. There's a weight in the air, a silence that settles when you're deep in nature. And that's when we saw him. A figure, emerging from the shadows. At first I thought it was another hiker, maybe someone lost, but there was something off about him. His clothes were spotless, as if he'd just stepped out of a store, and he was staring straight at us. I remember the feeling in the pit of my stomach. He was wearing full hiking gear, but didn't speak. No greeting, no hello, just an intense, unblinking stare. We tried talking to him, but the words felt forced, almost pointless. His gaze never wavered. It was like we didn't exist to him, like he wasn't really there at all. Finally, we decided to call it a night. Maybe he was just an odd stranger who'd lost his way, right? But I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still there, watching us, even after we retreated to our tents. The next morning we woke up and looked around, but he was gone. There wasn't a trace, not a footprint, no sign of him. It was as if he had simply vanished into thin air. We packed up quickly, wanting to get back to civilization. But as we passed the ranger station, something made me stop. I told the ranger about the hiker, and his expression froze. "Did you hear about the hiker who went missing here years ago?" he asked. "Apparently a man had disappeared in those very woods, never to be found. Some people believe he still roams the forests, lost, a ghost of the missing hiker. And I'll tell you this, after that night, I never set foot in those woods again." The Sierra Nevada mountains, remote, beautiful, and terrifying. A group of us, friends just looking for adventure, decided to camp there. It was meant to be the trip of a lifetime, but something felt off from the start. We arrived at our designated campsite, but as we began to set up our tents, we noticed something strange. About a half-mile down the trail, we spotted an abandoned campsite. Old tents, half collapsed, with belongings scattered everywhere. Clothes, gear, even food left half-eaten. It looked like someone had left in a hurry. The fire pit was still warm. Whoever had been here, they couldn't have left long ago. I remember feeling uneasy. We checked the area, calling out to see if anyone was around, but there was no answer. We debated leaving, but curiosity got the better of us. We decided to explore further, but as we did, the strange noises started. At first, it was just a snap of a twig here and there, but soon it became constant. The forest felt alive, too alive. Whispers in the trees, faint rustlings that didn't seem to come from the wind. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. Something wasn't right. When we tried to leave, it felt like something was following us. The footsteps, the whispers, they weren't just the wind. They were real, and they were closing in. We rushed back to our campsite, and after packing up in a panic, we rushed down the trail. We didn't stop until we reached the safety of our car. It wasn't until later that we learned something truly horrifying. People have gone missing in those mountains, and authorities, they never found out what happened. There's a dark history in those woods. People vanish without a trace, just like the campers who left their camp behind. I'll never forget the night in Wyoming. We were camping deep in the wilderness, a place where no one else would dare to go. The night was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that feels suffocating. That's when we heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps. At first I figured it was an animal, maybe a bear or a deer, but then we saw something that made my blood run cold. There were eyes, glowing, staring at us from the trees. Multiple sets of eyes, low to the ground, high up in the branches, just watching. There was no explanation, no animal that made sense. It felt like the whole forest was holding its breath. We couldn't move. The eyes didn't blink, didn't shift. They just watched us. For what felt like hours, we stayed frozen. It was like we were trapped, pinned under an invisible weight. Eventually, the eyes disappeared, but I don't think we'll ever know what they were. The next morning we found something else. Strange, human-like footprints, big ones surrounding our tents, but none of us had stepped outside. We were not alone. Alaska, a place that's both breathtaking and terrifying. A family trip, deep in the Alaskan wilderness. Nothing but us and the vast, empty land. But one night, we saw something, a shadow. It was like no shadow I've ever seen. It was too tall, too thin, almost inhuman. It moved at the edge of our camp, its form shifting like it wasn't quite solid. I remember calling out, thinking maybe it was another camper, but there was no response, no sound. We hurriedly extinguished our fire, hoping it was just our imagination. But when we retreated to our tents, we locked the zippers tight. In the middle of the night, I woke to a sound. Breathing. Heavy, labored breathing, coming from outside my tent. I didn't move. I didn't dare. But then I heard it. Footsteps, slowly, deliberately, circling around my tent. When I finally dared to peek out, I saw it. The shadow figure, standing just outside, staring at me. Its features were too distorted, too unnatural. I could feel it watching me, like it knew I was there, even though it didn't seem to move. We left at first light, and when we returned to check the area, there was nothing. No signs of anyone, no tracks, no evidence. But that shadow, I still see it in my nightmares. Colorado, the Rockies, a place of beauty and horror. We were camping, a group of college friends, but around midnight, something shattered the peace. A scream. It was faint at first, almost like the wind playing tricks, but then it came again. Closer this time, louder. It was human, distinctly human, a scream filled with terror. I remember the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. We grabbed our flashlights, our hearts pounding in our chests. We followed the scream through the trees. Our footsteps hurried and erratic. That's when we saw him, a man, stumbling out of the darkness. His clothes were torn, dirt smeared across his face. His eyes were wide with fear, his body trembling. He couldn't make sense of what had happened. All he could say was one thing. The woods, they're alive. He vanished before we could react, melting back into the darkness. We never saw him again. The next day, we reported the incident to the authorities, but they told us something that sent a chill down my spine. There had been disappearances in those very woods, but no one could ever explain why. What was drawing people in, and why they disappeared without a trace. I never went back to those woods, and I don't think I ever will.